Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty livecast. My name is Karen Conrad, and I'm here with Richard Harris.
Hey, Karen.
Thanks for having me back, Richard.
Oh, it's so good to have you.
It's such a blessing.
Like old times.
It really does, doesn't it? We're like family.
Yeah.
Well, we are so excited. We have got Bill Federer on with us tonight. Welcome, Bill.
Karen, Richard, great to be with you.
Oh, it's great to have you here. We were visiting a little bit beforehand, and there's just a lot of exciting things. Well, maybe not positive necessarily, but a lot happening right now. And so we're so excited to get into this with the broadcast tonight. Well, we've got so much happening here at Andrew Wommack Ministries. Richard, one thing that never ceases to amaze me is all the things that this ministry is doing really to reach the world.
It's incredible. We have a lot coming up, don't we?
We really do. Speaking
of which is the Stand for Truth and Liberty Conference, which is coming up next week.
That happened fast.
Yeah, I know. This is like the 4th conference this summer, but this one is going to be so good. July 18th through the 20th. Bishop E.W. Jackson and Andrew are going to be the featured speakers, but the lineup is incredible. It's like star-studded. Bill Federer, our guest tonight, is going to be here on Thursday and speak on Thursday morning. I think David Barton.
Yes.
Tim Barton.
I see Bob McEwen. Or no, Bob was actually just here. Bishop E.W. Jackson. We've got Alan West, Tim Barton, and Richard Harris.
Yes. Yeah. So it's going to be great.
Oh, it's so great. And, I want to just remind everybody, too, that there are so many resources on the Truth and Liberty website. Richard, you've done an amazing job just making sure we've got all the information for people. And I even see on here that we've got Bill, we've got your American Minute, which Andrew absolutely loves. And so people can access that right there on the Truth and Liberty website. Also, we've got iVoter Guide, and you've got the Republican Party platform and the Democratic Party platform. And so you're all about just making sure people are informed. But there's a vast difference between those platforms, and we know that. Also, we've got the Kingdom Youth Conference, which is happening August 2nd and 3rd, and we've got Todd White that is going to be a guest for that. Also, Healing is Here, which is our biggest conference for the ministry, and that is August 13th through the 16th. We always encourage people, if you need healing or you know somebody, if you need to be encouraged in what God has promised with healing, you have to come to this conference. It is amazing. We see miracles.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's just incredible. And then also, we've got a very special rally that is coming up. It's called In God We Trust Rally, Restoring Faith, Family, and Freedom to Colorado. That is September 14th, and you've got Dr. Lance Wallnau as a keynote speaker. And Richard, maybe you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we're really excited about this rally, and we're believing that God is going to do great things for the state of Colorado. You know, Colorado goes by various labels now. The latest one I heard is Little California. You know, Colorado used to be a reliably red state in the cultural and political sense, but it's taken a hard left turn. And it's time for the church here to come together and to act to reverse this course. And that's what we aim to do with this In God We Trust rally. So we're excited. Lance is going to be here, Pastor Mark Cowart, State Representative Mark Baisley, State Senator Dennis Heisey, and we've got some other surprises in store. But the main thing we want to do, we want to educate and inform people, but we also want to connect believers with grassroots organizations where they can get involved and actually make a difference, get out of the pew and into the public square. So if you live in Colorado, you need to show up for this rally. You will be super glad you did, because it's going to be a life-changing experience.
That is awesome, Richard. And, we just have to take a moment and thank Andrew. He's actually at a conference, a grace conference at Dr. Creflo Dollar's church this week is why he's not with us. But, Andrew has really taken a stand on things that affect this country.
That's right.
And we just want to thank him for that.
That's right.
It's really bold, but also he just knows like our future is at stake here.
That's right.
So thank you, Andrew.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you. One of the things that we do every week is we have a giveaway with a free product. And tonight we have got one of Andrew's, I always say this, like every book is great of Andrew's, right?
Yeah.
But this one in particular, do I say that every time? Probably. But how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. One of the biggest questions that we get here at the ministry is how to hear God's voice. And Andrew is, of course, one of the best at that.
Yeah.
So for you to be eligible for this book, you want to subscribe at truthandliberty.net. And if you are already subscribed, thank you for that. And you are eligible to win. And last week, our winner is Nina Griffith. And we just want to congratulate you, Nina. Do you know what Nina won? It's not listed here.
Oh, yes, she won, she won Susie Federer's Miracles in American History. So Bill's wife's, one of her books on the miracles in American history.
Oh, that's great. Nina, you will be blessed by that, and that is coming your way. Also, one of the special things about the Truth and Liberty broadcast is that we want to interact with you, especially when you learn about, how millennials and Gen Zs they want to interact and they want to hear from us and be able to ask questions. So one of the unique features about the Truth and Liberty broadcast is we visit for about a half hour, and then we take your questions. And so if you're watching us on social media, you can go ahead and enter that question in the comment section. If you're watching on awmi.net or truthandliberty.net, just join us on chat and put your question in there. We've got a whole team that's standing by, and they forward those questions, and we get to as many as we can. And then, Richard, you answer questions we don't get to the following week.
Yeah, we when we do our Facebook Live the next Monday, we try to pick up a couple questions that maybe we didn't get to. So we do our best.
Yeah, that's great. Also, I just want to encourage you, if Truth and Liberty is a blessing to you, this is a viewer-supported broadcast. So if it's on your heart, we encourage you to give towards this broadcast. There's a couple ways that you can do that. You can go to truthandliberty.net, click on Give, and you will be able to enter your information there. Or you can call the phone center at 719-635-1111 and let them know that you want to give towards the Truth and Liberty broadcast. I'll tell you, this is such great seed to sow. And
Absolutely.
This ministry is one of the, it is the best. I feel, of course, that's how we feel about this ministry, but please consider giving towards this broadcast. And also, we've got prayer ministers that are standing by. So the things that we discuss, sometimes we have questions about them, and we've got a whole team of prayer ministers that really want to pray with you. Or if you've got questions on the resources or how to navigate through the website, you can call that same phone number at 719-635-1111. Well, Bill, we are so glad to have you here, and you have got quite a resume here and a bio, so we want to welcome you. And Bill, just tell our audience a little bit about you if they've not seen you on the broadcast before or if they're not familiar with you.
Well, I wanted to at least hold up the picture of my wife's book, The Miracles in American History. So I've written about 20 books over the last 20 some odd years, and I do radio and TV and speak across the country, and ran for Congress a couple times, didn't win, but came close. But it gave me enough of a feel for how disorganized Washington, D.C. is. You see the news and you think Republicans this, Democrats that. It's really unorganized. And congressmen are only in for 2-year terms, and their staffers are in that position as short as they can be until they can climb the ladder and take another position. So almost every time you would call up to D.C., you'd talk to somebody else. And the only comfort is the other side has the same set of variables as our side. But it's really highlights the fact that in America, the people are the king. The word citizen means co-king. Now, kings in Europe, kings have subjects. Dictators have subjects. They're subjected to their will. But a republic is where the people are king ruling through representatives. we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic, we're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves. And so when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore. I protest this system where I participate in ruling myself. It's like, okay, somebody else will rule your life. But we're citizens, and the word citizen means co-king. And so we are all responsible to steer this ship in the right direction. And that's, again, why I'm so thrilled with what you, Karen, and you, Richard, are doing, and especially Andrew Womack, that he is stepping forward and allowing himself to be a leader and helping to wake up the church to realize that, hey, church, you are co-kings of every church member is a co-king of America, and you need to take that responsibility seriously.
Bill, that's really great. I know you wouldn't do this for yourself, so I'm going to do it for you, but you've got a book on that very subject, and I think it's called Who is the King in America and Who is His Counselor, or Who are His Counselors? And I don't want to be a spoiler on this, but it's an awesome concept that in America, citizens are the king. Well, every king has a counselor, right? And who is the counselor to the king in America? Well,
that's the pastor.
It's the pastor, right?
So Pew Forum, that's PEW Forum, they do surveys, and they identify that 70% of Americans identify themselves as Christian. Now, 20 years ago, it used to be 90%. Man, we have fallen a lot. But 70% is still a majority. And so since 70% of Americans identify themselves as Christian, that means they go to church at least every now and then, which makes the pastors counselors to the king. So the pastors have the king sitting in their pew every Sunday. And you have two kinds of pastor counselors. One tells the king to go to sleep, shirk your responsibility, don't get involved. And the other throws ice water on his congregation and says, wake up. You don't just have the right to vote in America. You will be held accountable to God for what happens. If they're teaching stuff to little kids that Jesus wouldn't teach, Jesus says, if you cause one of these little ones that believes in me to stumble, better than a millstone we put around your neck. And so you and me, the king, we're allowing them to teach stuff to kids in schools that Jesus wouldn't teach. Jesus says God in the beginning made them male and female. Yet we're allowing them to teach in schools that it's fluid sexuality. You can be a girl today, boy tomorrow. I think we are asking for the judgment of God to come upon us if we don't stand up and realize that and their tactic is pretty interesting. They try to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. You say, what? Yeah, they say, if you're really Christian, you'll tolerate this agenda. Well, would Jesus tolerate that? Jesus, the Bible says that we're made in God's image. Well, they teach that if there is a God, he is so messed up, he's put in men and women's bodies, and you have to have operations to fix it. What a messed up God. In other words, they're undermining biblical belief, and we're allowing it, and we're the king. And so it's a serious responsibility that we need to wake up to.
Karen mentioned Bill's American Minute, and we do have a link on our website where you can go and sign up for that, and you get that in your inbox every week. And I tell you, you read Bill's American Minutes, and you'll become an authority on history, American history, pretty quick. But also, Bill, if they want to go straight to your website and sign up there, what's the address there? It's AmericanMinute.com, right?
Right, AmericanMinute.com, but you can also go through the Truth and Liberty Coalition website, and which I obviously prefer, so that they stay in contact with you, Richard.
Andrew is such a fan of the American Minute.
Yes, he is.
He talks about it so much, Bill. So thank you for doing that. And you're really helping to inform all of us on what's actually happening and really where we came from with the history.
Absolutely.
I was even just hearing there was a principal in Florida that told the student that, well, I really don't have evidence that the Holocaust, actually happened. And we have people that are trying to rewrite history. So thank you for keeping us on track with history.
Well, we were, somebody sent me the video of the governor of Kentucky, and he was actually reading out of the book that my wife and I put together. And so they're mentioning it by name and so forth. And one of the favorite quotes I use is, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. was a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian on John F. Kennedy's staff. The quote is, history is to the nation what memory is to the individual. Wow. So have you ever met an individual who has lost their memory? Maybe they have Alzheimer's. It's really sad. They don't remember who they are. They don't remember who you are. We sort of have national Alzheimer's. Here we are, the freest country that the world has ever seen, with more individual freedom and opportunity to choose what you want to do with your life and where you want to go to church. We have that, and we forgot how we got here. And we're like staring off into space like that Alzheimer patient, and they're taking our freedoms away from us. And so sometimes when I share the history stories, it's like that little twinkle comes back into the person's eyes, and they go, is that Bill? Is that you? Is it who? Is it? So we remember who we are. It's our corporate memory, is the history stories.
Wow, that's a great point. There's a lot going on in the news right now, isn't there?
There is.
And last week, of course, was the 4th of July. And Bill, I don't know if you were in Washington or if you saw any part of. We had a fantastic 4th of July celebration here, I'm telling you, but President Trump put on a 4th of July celebration on the Mall in Washington. And it was like at the same time or just a couple days before that, Nike had put out this tennis shoe with the Betsy Ross flag, the one with the 13 stars in a circle. And Colin Kaepernick objected to it, saying it was a symbol of slavery, which is historically ridiculous. But nevertheless, he did, and Nike yanked it. And so we have these two veins going on right now in this country, but it strikes me that there's like a revival of patriotism right now. What do you think, Bill? I mean, those images from that rally in Washington were very impressive to me. I mean, it was packed out and a beautiful display. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, Betsy Ross was a Quaker. The Quakers were the first and the strongest opponents of slavery in America. All the way back to William Penn, who had been in prison in London, in the Tower of London, and he came to America, and he opened up his province, the colony of Pennsylvania, for all the persecuted peoples of Europe. Matter of fact, the Quakers, instead of the corporal punishment that the kings had, where you would whip somebody or put them in stocks, the Quakers came up with this idea that if there's a criminal, you put them in a room with a Bible and you leave them in there until they repent, till they become penitent. And so they called the place the penitentiary. And it caught on, and it spread. And so that's where we get our penitentiary from, the Quakers. Well, the Quakers were anti-slavery. There was a Quaker named Anthony Benezet. And in the early 1700s, he on his own began to educate and teach young black children. And then he went to the annual Quaker Friends meeting that they still have. And he proposed that the denomination go on record as being officially against slavery. First denomination ever to do this. And every single government meeting, the Quakers would say, we got to get rid of slavery. We got to get rid of slavery. Matter of fact, you read some of the writings of the documents of the journals of Congress. They'll say, we talked about this and that. And, oh, yeah, and the Quaker Memorial. You go, what's the Quaker Memorial? They brought up getting rid of slavery so much that it was nicknamed the Quaker Memorial. It was like they were totally against slavery. And so for Betsy Ross to be a Quaker, that she was born and raised Quaker. She was the 8th of 17 children. So for somebody to try to say that they want to protest a Quaker for being a slavery symbol, they're either totally ignorant of history or what, I don't know. But you don't want to protest a Quaker. The Quakers are the most they started the first abolitionist society in America. The Quakers did. And then eventually Ben Franklin became the president of that anti-slavery society. So with that background, Betsy Ross, a Quaker, she is against slavery. She's an abolitionist. She's her life, by the way, is interesting. She was a seamstress, and she was married to John Ross, who was an upholsterer. And it was a mixed marriage. Now, we think of mixed marriage as different races. Back then, it was different denominations. They didn't marry, so no preacher would say the wedding. So they had to have a justice of the peace, which was actually the governor of New Jersey. His name was William Franklin, the son of Ben Franklin. Now, as the war picks up, William Franklin's a loyalist, and he goes to Britain, and Ben Franklin never talks to him again. But John and Betsy Ross go to the Christ Church in Philadelphia, and their pew is next to George Washington's and not far from Ben Franklin's. And Pennsylvania is unique. You see, every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Rhode Island was Baptist, New York was Dutch Reformed, Delaware and New Jersey were Swedish Lutheran, Maryland Catholic, Connecticut, New Hampshire Congregationalist, and they did not get along. They would tar and feather each other, chase them out of their colonies. Well, Ben Franklin came up with his holy experiment. What was it? To see if Christians of different denominations could live in the same geographic area. Wow, what a novel idea. So in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, there were Baptist churches and Anglican churches and Quaker Friends meeting houses and all these different ones. So that's why all of the other colonies felt comfortable coming to Philadelphia for the Continental Congress, where they wrote the Declaration of Independence, where the Liberty Bell was rung on July 8th, 1776, where they had the Constitutional Convention. It was the first capital of America for a while after New York. And so a lot of things happened in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, because of all the different denominations feeling comfortable coming there. I sort of got off track, but Betsy Ross.
No, but that's fascinating.
John Ross. He dies
great.
when the munitions depot blows up, and so he is. Betsy's a widow, and that's when George Washington and George Ross, who's a signer of the Declaration, ask her to sew a flag. She sews the flags for the Pennsylvania Navy and a bunch of other flags, and there's other women that sew flags in America, but we note her. She marries Joseph Ashburn, who in the Old Swedes Church, a Lutheran church. He's a sea captain. He goes to the West Indies to look for supplies to bring back to the colonies for the Revolutionary War. He's captured, put in Old Mill Prison, where he dies. And then the cellmate was John Claypool. He finally gets out. He goes to Betsy to tell about Joseph Ashburn dying. John Claypool falls in love with Betsy, and they get married and have 5 kids. So Betsy Ross was married to 3 American patriots, and just a tremendous woman of courage and faith.
Oh, my goodness.
That's fascinating.
That is just a great example of what people can get from the American Minute, isn't it?
Yeah, and Bill also is instructor in the Practical Government School here at Charis Bible College. So they can also get in-depth instruction like that here. That's kind of a shameless plug, but it's the truth. So
I always enjoy coming there.
Do you know, being a mom and a grandma now, I just really feel like what you have with what's happening in our schools, like if I was raising kids right now, I would totally subscribe to the American Minute and share this information with my children, especially homeschool, or just make sure that the information you're sharing gets passed on to our kids and our grandkids. And so if you're a mom or a grandma, I encourage you to subscribe and share this with your children and grandchildren.
Well, you know, it's so important, and I don't want to monopolize the time, so stop me, but there's a communist tactic called deconstruction, where you separated people from their past, get them into a neutral where they do not remember where they came from, then you brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. It's a sales technique. If I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I do is say negative things about the toothpaste you are currently using. You're still using that old stuff. Don't you know it'll eat the enamel off your teeth? You're like, ooh, really? And you're repulsed by it. Now I have you into a neutral. You're open-minded. What are all the toothpastes out there? Then I give you my pitch for this tartar control, breath freshener, enamel strengthening stuff, right? So they use this tactic in the classroom, and they go into the classroom and they tell the kids negative things about the founding fathers. They took land from Indians. They sold people into slavery. They were chauvinists, and ooh, the students are repulsed by them. Now you have the students in a neutral position. They're open-minded. What are all the belief systems out there? Then you give them your pitch for socialism or LGBT or Islam. And Europe went through this. It went from a Judeo-Christian Europe with Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods, to a secular Europe with the French Revolution, Robespierre, Napoleon, and it was free sex, anything goes, LGBT. And now it's turning into an Islamic Europe, with Muhammad being the #1 name for newborns and no-go zones. So we see we've gone from Bibles in the schools to condoms in the schools. Now it's hijabs in the schools. And so when you study history, you see this trend. And so it's when we think, oh, the founders, they were humans, they had lots of faults. Yeah, they did. But no matter what faults they had, they gave us a form of government where we get to be in charge, where we get to be in charge of our own individual life. And then together we're in charge of the country.
Well, that's great, Bill.
We wish they were all great, but they weren't. But it really doesn't matter. They simply gave us a gift. And the gift is that we have this freedom.
Well, you can really see that played out in this whole Colin Kaepernick thing, where he's so uninformed and ignorant, maybe miseducated, that he claims that the flag of the revolution, or Betsy Ross's flag, was a symbol of racism and slavery, when it has nothing to do with that, and he's feeding right into the lie that all the founding fathers were bigots and slaveholders. So that's a great point there, Bill. But you know, I was really impressed with the rally in Washington, that July 4th, with the crowds and all of that. And you know, the media, it seems like the left and the media, that they don't want to touch anything that's patriotic these days. You know, they were saying ahead of this 4th of July celebration in Washington that it was going to be a Stalin-esque kind of Soviet May Day military parade thing. Yes. And nothing could be further from the truth. You know, Trump didn't say anything partisan. It was pro-American and beautifully done, I feel like. I think even the liberals were having to admit that. But then their response is just not to cover it. And so I don't know. It's interesting. Why is it, Bill, that the liberals seem to be so anti-American?
Well, one of the tactics they use is divide and conquer. And so patriotism is the enemy. And you can actually go back in 1963, Congressman Herlong from Florida read it into the congressional records, the goals to defeat America that the communists had. And it was, you infiltrate the schools, and you infiltrate the churches, and you infiltrate both political parties, and you get people to identify with a group rather than the country. Yep. Once you get them into groups, you pit the groups against each other and cause division. Once there's division, then you can come in and take over. The British took over India this way. So they land in Bengal, and they then have a little trading post. The British give guns to one kingdom, and then they give guns to another kingdom, and then they stir up ancient animosity, so the kingdoms fight each other. And when they beat each other up really bad, the British come in and conquer both. And then they give guns to another kingdom and another one. They keep doing this until the British conquer all of India, a quarter of the world's population. So the British tried doing this in America. How? They would go to the Indians and give them guns and tell them to scalp the Americans on our frontiers, like Fort Mims, Alabama, where the Indians scalped over 500 people. And the historical marker says the Indians were supplied with guns by the British, who controlled Pensacola, Florida. And so this strategy of divide and conquer, it's been used by the KGB. I hate to say it. It's been used by our CIA. So after World War II, Iran got a leader named Mossadegh, and he was leaning toward the Soviet Union. And Eisenhower approved the first CIA plan to overthrow a leader called Operation Ajax, where our CIA went in there and found groups of people that didn't like him. We stirred them up, we gave them guns, and when the whole thing got out of hand, we could swoop in and we installed the Shah. And so the Shah was pro-American. And but the KGB does this. So what we're experiencing on America are these tactics done on our own soil. Mm-hmm. So you have groups that come in and they want you to identify with a group instead of the country. And then you pit the groups against each other. It's a very effective strategy. Matter of fact, you look at how the Congo, when the colonizers came in there, they invented a race. You think, what? They invented a race? Well, the Africans all got along. Well, they measured them, the different sizes, that their height and their head size, and they divided them into Hutus and Tutsis. And then they pitted them against each other. And then when they started violently killing each other, the colonial powers could come in and take over. And so this divide and conquer strategy, again, I could give you more examples through history, but we're seeing that being displayed here in America. Athens, where the people ruled back in, 600 to 300 BC, there was a king to the north. Am I still on?
Yes.
Yes, you're on. Your picture has frozen. Can you hear us, Bill? All right. Well, we're having a little bit of technical. Oh, are you back now, Bill?
Am I?
Yes.
It looked like my screen froze.
We've got you back, and you were talking about Athens, ancient Athens, I think.
All right. Well, I apologize to the listeners for my screen freezing there, but so Athens was a democracy. A democracy is different than a republic. A democracy is where every citizen every day has to be at the market to talk politics. There are 6,000 citizens in Athens. They all went to the agora, the marketplace. And if you did not show up for a couple of days, you did not know what was going on. You were called an idiotus, an idiot. And a republic is different. A republic is where you take care of your family and your farm, and you have someone in your place that goes to the market every day and talks politics. They're your representative. So the REP in republic is the same REP in representative. Well, Athens, everybody has to be there. And Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's dad, was conquering different cities like Thebes and Amphipolis. And he took money, and he was using the money to bribe citizens of Athens under the table, so they would betray their city. And so they'd all get together in the market and say, we got to get our defenses. We got to stand up to Philip. And these paid propagandists would stand up and say, well, let's not get carried away. Let's not jump to conclusions. I hear Philip's not such a bad guy. I hear he's not conquering these cities. He's liberating them. And the people actually like Philip. And these paid propagandists would gather around themselves what Lenin later called useful idiots, people that believe these lies. And this became what was called a fifth column. You say, what's a fifth column? In battle, you'd have the two center columns and the two flanks. The fifth column was the paid propagandists inside of the city that you're wanting to conquer. And they would confuse the defenses and the moral fiber and so forth. And I mean, we did this in different wars where you drop pamphlets down on the enemy and saying, you know, your forces are surrendering, quick, flee. Or they drop these propaganda pamphlets, but they've obviously taken to the internet and the websites and the social media now. They've perfected it a little bit more. But it's this fifth column, this paid propagandists, the useful idiots. That's like the indivisible, where these students will get a text from their teacher that says, show up to protest something. And the kids show up and they don't even know why they're there. You stick a microphone in your face. Why are you here? It's like, I don't know. Talk to somebody else. They're useful idiots. And so what happens is they're being used to create division, because when there's division and confusion and insecurity for life and property, everybody says we need the government to step in and restore order. The government comes in, collects everybody's guns, takes away your freedom of speech, so you can't say stuff that'll offend somebody that's going to riot. Yeah, they restore order, but when the dust settles, you will have transitioned from the people ruling themselves from the bottom up back to a government and a dictator ruling from the top down. So stirring up division is the tactic to cause confusion and insecurity, and after that, you have a dictator seize power.
You know, Richard, we've had guests on from England, and they've been trying to warn us, like, please pay attention to what's happening here, because there's a fair amount of England now that's under Sharia law. And I find it really interesting that really the premise of, let's just say, the LGBT agenda is freedom, right? But really, it's interesting the way you laid it out, Bill, is that actually what comes after that is Islam coming in, which has no tolerance for any of those things. And so the very thing that people are wanting, what you've described, is they lose the very thing they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, Plato talks about this. I mean, this is 380 BC in his Republic. He goes, the extreme form of liberty ends up with the dictator taking power. And then during the French Revolution, you had philosophers, like Edmund Burke in England, and talking about that this liberty that's going on in France turned into chaos. And what happened out of that chaos? A dictator arose, Napoleon, right? And so so it's no different than a parent giving the teenager the car keys and says, look, you're a good kid. You can come home whenever you want. But if the kid hangs around the wrong type of kids and drinks and parties and drives the car and hits someone and kills them, and now this teenager is put in jail and facing mandatory prison. In other words, look, teenager, you are going to be controlled. It is either voluntarily from the inside or forcibly from the outside. Same way with a nation. We are either going to be voluntarily controlled with internal morals, or we're going to teach the kids there's no right, there's no wrong. You can situation ethics justify any type of crime. You can feel like a girl today, a boy tomorrow. There's no morals, there's no absolutes, just give in to your passions and lusts. And these kids do, and there's chaos and crime. And then what happens? Everybody says, government, you got to step in and restore order. And the government does, but in the process, they take away all your freedoms. It's a predictable pattern that's been used for millenniums, which says we don't know the history to know that it's being played on us right now.
Well, I think we're gonna take some questions here in a little bit, but Bill, it sounds to me like all of this probably comes from kicking God out of our public life, right? I mean, the thing that made America different from the French Revolution that you just mentioned was that ours was a God-centered, God-based, revolving around the scriptures and the principles of the Bible. But the French, they kicked God completely out, and they lost their moral compass in the process. And it seems today we don't have that. We're losing that unifying faith in God that gives us a common morality and a common set of standards and beliefs. Am I right here, or what do you think?
Right. So the Reformation happens, and you have scholars in Europe in the 1500s called Christian Hebraists, and they're studying this first 400-year period when Israel comes out of Egypt, where they did not have a king, and they were a people in covenant with each other and God. Right? The covenant, they'd stand on the one hill and the other hill, and they'd say the blessings, the curse. It was entering into what's a covenant? It's people in agreement with each other, getting rights from God, accountable to God. Well, that's what the founders set up in New England. These Puritans and these Pilgrims, they had a covenant form of government, people in agreement with each other, rights from God, accountable to God. In the next century, the Age of Enlightenment comes in, and covenant changes into social contract. People in agreement with each other, with or without God. If he's there, fine. If he's not there, it's no big deal. The next century, social contract turns into the French Revolution and Marxism, and it's people in agreement with each other intentionally without God. And you get your rights from the group, you're accountable to the group. It sounds good until the group decides that you're not contributing enough or you're a threat to the group. And lo and behold, the group becomes God. The state becomes God, and your life is only of value if you serve the state. And if there's no God, rights come from the state. What the state giveth, the state can take it awayeth. And so this is what happened in France. They tried to have a revolution. There was no God. They chopped off 40,000 heads in Paris, France, of people that they did not think was contributing to the state. And then there was a group called the Vendée out in northwest France, and they send their army and kill 300,000 men, women, and children in the Vendée. And so without God, the state is the one who gives rights. The state can take away rights. And if you're a threat to the state wants to kill you. And so you transition from a covenant, people in agreement with each other, rights from God, accountable to God, to people in agreement with each other, social contract, to specifically a social contract without God, and then the state's God.
Wasn't it Thomas Jefferson who said that he trembles for his country if we ever forget that our rights come from God? You can probably quote him verbatim on that, but knowing... Yeah, go ahead.
The Jefferson Memorial, Washington, D.C. I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and his justice cannot sleep forever.
And he said something about remembering where our rights come from, but...
Right. The God who gave us life gave us liberty, and can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a belief in the minds of the men that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be removed, but with his wrath. And so he said, look, the foundation of our country is us acknowledging God. So if you think of it as a spectrum of power, one side is total government, the other side is no government, right? Total government, you get a king, he rules through fear. You do what he says or he kills you. The other side of the spectrum is no government. No government would be anarchy unless each person is taught the law. It's like everybody downloads a behavioral app on their iPhone, right? It's like instead of a GPS telling you where to turn, it tells you how to act. And the Levites were the computer geeks that help you to download this app, right? Memorize this line here, line upon line, precept upon precept, press this button. And so you take the power of a king, you separate it into the hands of the people. It's chaos unless the people are all taught the law. But the big question is, what would motivate you to follow this law? What would cause you to deny yourself yielding to a temptation? Israel introduced the key ingredient. There is a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he's going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal. Nobody's around. You know you can get away with it. And then you remember, God is watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. and it creates something in your head called a conscience. If everybody in the country really, truly believes this, you can maintain complete security for property, for safety. Women can go anywhere without fear. Maximum liberty. So it worked. Now, it only works with the God of the Bible. An Islamic Allah God says there's an infidel woman over there. You can rape her. It's okay. You can lie to this infidel, steal from that infidel. The God of the Bible says there's one law for the stranger and for the Israelite, right? And this God wants you're all made in his image, and he wants you to be fair. And anyway, so that's the model. You take the power of the king, separate it into the hands of the people. It's chaos unless each person is taught the law. Why do they follow the law? There's the God of the Bible. This is what America's founders looked to when they set up New England, they set up our country. So when we say it's one nation under God, it's more than just a nice little acknowledgement. That's the energy, the motivating force that makes the self-government thing work.
Wow.
It's the battery that makes this phone work. It's the sun that makes everything grow. This acknowledgement that there is this God of the Bible who's watching you. He wants you to be fair. He's going to hold you accountable in the future. Well,
Bill, that's awesome. We got to get to some questions, but before we do that, I just want to mention one thing that you talked about before we came on the air, which is that you're working with, is it Congressman Portman from Ohio, I think, Rob Portman, Senator Portman, about the DDay prayer project. You want to share a little bit about that real quickly?
Right. So the World War II Memorial is built, and afterwards, everyone realizes there's not one mention of God on it. There's mentions of God in the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, other memorials, and yet a whole lot of the people that died believed in God. Remember in France, you see the crosses of D-Day and the Stars of David. But why, during the Clinton administration, they approved it, why is there no mention of God? There's even one verse where Franklin Roosevelt says, and we will gain the inevitable victory, so help us God. And so you look at the World War II Memorial, says, we will gain the inevitable victory, period. It's like almost intentional that they left off any reference to God. So Chris Long of the Ohio Christian Alliance thought of the idea of adding Franklin Roosevelt's D-Day prayer to the World War II Memorial with no editing. It's an entire prayer. Starts off, Almighty God, our sons, the pride of our nation, this day have set upon a great endeavor to preserve our republic, our religion, our civilization. Many of them won't return, receive them into thy kingdom. And he goes on this great prayer. And so this Senator Rob Portman of Ohio and Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio gave speeches on the floor of the House and Senate, went back and forth. Finally, it was passed because FDR was a Democrat. He was president for 12 years, believe it or not, got elected president 4 times. Luckily, they passed the 22nd Amendment after that to limit it to 2 terms. But it passed to put this prayer on the mall. Now, it's a prayer, so the federal government will not spend a cent. So it has to be paid for with private donations. But we have all the approval. And so ddayprayerproject.org is the website. If anyone wants to help make it a reality. Now, there's a time limit that we have to get the money together to do it by the end of this year. Otherwise, the clock runs out and they would have to reintroduce the legislation. And because of the dynamics of the House and the Senate right now, it probably would not pass. So we really have a window in time to add Franklin Roosevelt's D-Day prayer, acknowledging God multiple times throughout this prayer. It was, when he gave it, it was listened to by 100 million people. Wow. This is him announcing D-Day, and he announced D-Day through this prayer.
Well, how fitting, because this is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So if people want to donate to that project, they can go to ddayprayerproject.org, and we encourage you to do that. We're going to take some questions now. I'm sure we've got some good ones coming in.
We do. Bill, this has been awesome. So our first question is from Guest 481 on chat, and they say this: very interesting about the divide and conquer approach used in history with nations. But what can we do as a country so we do not become a victim of this manipulation?
Well, I would first study, and I talk about this in the Who is the King book, Machiavelli, Hegel, Saul Alinsky, and you can see they lay out their strategy, and so it reveals it. So 500 years ago, Italy was not Italy. It was a bunch of city-states: Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they always fought. So Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting between these kingdoms. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince wants to conquer a city, the city would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals to kill cows and burn barns and create crisis and terror, the people will cry out for help. The prince will come in and kill the very criminals he bribed. Nobody would know the better for it, and everyone would praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need, and then you fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire, and then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher. And they'll pay anything for it and even thank you for being there. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on crisis to consolidate control. And so if you look at it, we have these crises in America, and then there's the media whips everybody into this frenzy. And we have to hurry up and pass this healthcare bill. It's an urgent crisis. And then somebody pulls out this 5,000-page bill out of their drawer that nobody has time to read. And you have a speaker, as Nancy Pelosi says, we have to hurry up and pass this thing so we can find out what's in it. It's like, and so it all worked because, and she even didn't have a voice. She just did it on a voice vote. She said, I deem this passed, boom. And so you understand that they had to create this mood of a crisis in order to get the public opinion to allow them to usurp the power. And so that's the strategy. So you can look at whenever there's a gun shooting or, some type of whatever, some type of crisis, the immediate response is hurry up and give up some of your freedom, knee-jerk reaction.
Wow. And I think we had some information coming out that some of the leaders in the Liberal Party were absolutely calling for chaos.
Right.
And it's like, it's not even hidden. It's so blatant.
Right.
But this information is so critical for us to understand.
It is.
And very, very helpful so that we see actually the manipulation that's happening.
Right. Well, I think, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. We've got to educate our kids. We've got to get the word out there, in our churches, in our schools, and in our families. And this is another reason why Christians have got to get into the public square and start speaking the truth.
Right. And starting in our own families.
That's right. Starting in our own families. No one else is going to do it for us.
That's exactly right. Well, this is an interesting question in light of what's been happening in the news. This is a guest that asked this: is the Obama-Clinton media machine breaking down?
I personally hope so. But there is, if you look at the ownership of most of the major media, they're all individuals that tend to have more of a globalist point of view. And so they, there's Council on Foreign Relations, the David Rockefeller, all the Trilateral Commission, there's all these groups, Club of Rome, there's the Bilderberg, they have that annual meeting, but these are all people that for the most part have a globalist view, and they have a strong control of most of the media. I personally think that President Trump is a monkey wrench in their plans. That President Trump is a patriot, and he is in favor of America, and they don't like that, and that's why they have taken out. Now, most politicians, I ran for Congress 3 times, you need money. Unless somebody is independently wealthy, you have to go to those that have the money. So there's pictures of Hillary Clinton meeting with George Soros and John McCain meeting with George Soros. I mean, they're both, and to these wealthy people, they view it as betting on every horse in the race, and whoever wins owes them. And so they'll give speeches on one side, but then once they get in power, they sort of have to do what the people who paid for their campaign tell them to do. That's one of the reasons Phyllis Schlafly. I knew Phyllis Schlafly for 40 years and spoke at her conventions. And she supported President Trump because she said he was not owned by the kingmakers. In other words, he did not have to go and bow down to all these globalist people with their funds and do his thing. He could just be himself because he had, and so I I really respect Phyllis, and I am appreciative of President Trump putting his life on the line when he could just have to live the rest of his life in a very luxurious way without having to suffer all the slings and arrows of being in the public eye. He could have just finished out his life, but he decided he was going to step in. Why? Because I believe he's a patriot. I think he's demonstrated that he's a patriot. He's not a globalist.
Well, Bill, I'm going to jump in here for just a second. I think what we're seeing right now, you tell me if I'm right on this or wrong, but it seems like there might be a backlash taking place. You know, the entire field of Democrat presidential candidates are extreme left-wing people advocating for free government-subsidized health care for illegal aliens, eliminating immigration enforcement, and on the list goes. You have Antifa mobs attacking journalists, sending people to the hospital. You have all this radical LGBT indoctrination and forced ideology and restrictions of freedom of speech. And, you know, there's some polls that have come out lately. I don't put a lot of confidence in polls, Karen, but it's interesting. The latest poll, just speaking of abortion, the Gallup showed 60% of Americans now believe that abortion should never be allowed or most of the time be prohibited. That's up 7% since last year alone. And then USA Today, we put these on our links for this broadcast, had a poll reported on a Harris poll that showed every age demographic in America becoming less tolerant of the LGBT ideology. Trump is at his highest approval rating yet in his career. Today. So, you know, it's interesting what's happening, and, you know, whether this is just a result of current conditions or maybe whether there's a significant attitude shift taking place in America. Either way, it's positive news. What do you think of those things, Bill?
Well, I think the public opinion is moving in the right direction, and I think that's why they're making a play for voter fraud and also for manipulating the process. If you think it through, you let Antifa have demonstrations in the city, you let homeless people come into the city, you let the crime go up. What do people that have the financial means do? They move out.
That's true.
And so usually people that are financially responsible, a good percentage of those are Republicans. So in other words, you let the crime go up, a whole lot of Republicans will leave. Who's left? People that are on welfare, on the doles. They're looking to the government for a handout. And so the government basically controls their vote. And if you think of it, if you just do that in the big cities, you win the whole state. So Chicago determines the entire state of Illinois. So if you can let crime, insecurity go up in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York, in these big cities, then where does the voter fraud take place? I mean, I mentioned I ran for Congress several times. We personally experienced them leaving my name off the ballots in 5 wards in the city of St. Louis. We experienced them leaving the polls open till midnight in the city, and people lined up all around the streets. And they had the computers go down, and one thing after the other. They would lose boxes of ballots. And I think
Yeah, it looks like Bill's screen froze again. He'll probably pop right back on here.
Do you know what he's talking about, too? Remember, we've been talking about Minnesota?
Yeah.
Of course, I'm from Minnesota.
Yeah, okay. I hear you again.
Oh, great. And what you're describing there, I'm always looking, and if you look at what happened in the state, from a broad perspective, from just geographic, it was almost all Trump. But the areas that won the state were very, very concentrated. And but I think that's one of the states we have hope for.
Right. That
people are going to stand up and see kind of what's happening. Right. And programs like this is what we're here for, is to help get the truth out so that people realize, like, wow, I'm just seeing what's happening.
That's right. Well, the National Popular Vote Compact is the same idea. Just to remind people about that, Colorado joined into that compact last year, and I think last time I checked there were 14 or 15 states, but their goal is to get enough states that represent 270 electoral votes so that The idea is if whoever wins the national popular vote, then all of those electoral votes will go toward that candidate, regardless of how the citizens of those particular states voted. And the whole idea there is that the liberal-controlled, Democratic-controlled machines in the cities and major population centers would control the election of the president. But we're down to 3 minutes. Do we have time for a short question?
Yes, I think we do. Anna on chat asked this: what is the solution to getting accurate history back in the public schools? The process, protocol, and politics. And is anyone doing anything about it currently?
There are some states that have laws to teach the Constitution, to teach the founding documents, and Ohio was one of those states. I know David Barton spent time on curriculum and to get those into different schools. But it's a battle. You have to understand that politicians want to get reelected. There's a guy named James Buchanan. He won the Nobel Prize for economics in 1980. Why? Because he figured out what motivated politicians. He's like, how can these politicians vote on economics? How can they vote to keep increasing the debt? He found out if the politician is facing re-election, they'll vote to increase the debt so they can funnel money to their district because it'll help them to get reelected. But they won't vote for the tax increase to pay for it because that'll hurt their reelection. And so here he wins the Nobel Prize because he finds out what motivates politicians. They want to get reelected. And so if you can let this politician know that we're going to either support you or we're going to fight you if you don't do what we want you to do, that's the only thing they're going to listen to. Now, there are some that are standing up because they have moral fiber, but a whole lot of them, they simply will do whatever it takes to get reelected. So you have to put pressure on them. And another thing I bring up is you're the king. So you that are watching me, you're the king. And if you think of it, imagine visiting a king in the Old Testament. You're going through the streets and you're witnessing all kinds of crime, and you get into the king's chamber and he has his head in his hand. He looks up at you and he says, "Did you solve that crime? I wish somebody would fix it." Well, it's in America, that's you and me. We're watching TV, seeing all the terrible stuff, and we're saying, "Gee, I wish somebody would fix it." Well, hello, have a finger come through the tube and tap you on the shoulder. You're the king. You're the one accountable to God and responsible to fix it. And the next thought is, well, I need somebody to tell me what to do. Since when does the king sit on his throne and say, "Can somebody tell me what I'm supposed to do here? Hey, butler, come here. What am I supposed to do?" No, it's your job to get educated on the issues, seek God's will, and you tell your representatives what needs to happen. And the same way that the God of the universe creates a million different little birds and fishes and everything has a purpose. He creates different people, and each one of them, he gives them another idea and another gift. And so you are going to have ideas on how to turn this thing around that nobody else is going to have. And you take that idea and you work with it. You make the phone calls and
Bill,
you write the songs.
I've got to jump in here and cut you off, unfortunately, because we've only got about 30 seconds remaining. So I just want to, Karen and I both want to thank you so much for coming on the live cast tonight. I know everybody's enjoyed it. Remind all our viewers you can check out Bill's website at AmericanMinute.com and sign up for his email. And join us next week, everybody. We're going to have a representative here, the senior counsel from Alliance Defending Freedom, to talk about what's going on at the Supreme Court. The week after, we're going to have a sitting congressman live in studio with us. And so we've got a whole slate of great guests lined up. But tune in next week on truthandliberty.net, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And we look forward to seeing you again. God bless.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net or by calling our phone center at 719-635-1111. Our prayer ministers are there to help you with your donations and to pray with you.